of a hiatus. We had some. I was out on parental leave. I now have my first son, Teddy, and we had some other organizer issues. We had some meetings scheduled, and then some other family things come back. So I think we're all good now. So hopefully everybody is good to go, and we'll be back to our regularly monthly cadence. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker, Kevin. Kevin works in Microsoft with Eric. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Kevin, and the topic, go for it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I am well, we're now on different managers, same overall team, but Derek and I are both part of the U.S. Professional Services organizational unit within our, we call it MCAPS. It's just basically our big sales organization. We manage customers that are all about professional services. I am a software solution engineer, which is a distinction between Derek's, because Derek's an application and AI solution engineer. My focus is around everything developer. So I am really going to be, of course, focused on GitHub and GitHub Copilot. AI-assisted agentic development is the kind of key part of my job, but it also encompasses Visual Studio, Azure DevOps, and other tools as well, and services. I've been with Microsoft for coming up on 21 years this December, done lots of different roles, but I have been in this role with at least the capacity of this role, different title, but for the last 3 years or so. So thanks for having me. The title, we'll just keep going since I want to make sure we optimize our time too. The title of this is going to be, it was really about, Derek asked me, I had delivered a day in the life session to our customers. I said, can you do the same one? But it was centered around this idea of spec-driven development. So the title of this looks like it was spec-driven development. So we're going to have, yes, Daniel?
Oh.
So we're going to talk about spec-driven development using a tool called SpecKit. But I also overall want to show you kind of as a developer, where will you see and use GitHub Copilot throughout all of the different areas where it gets exposed and turned on. If you are currently using GitHub Copilot and you don't see some of these features or don't have access to some of these capabilities, it might be the fact that you have an admin in your organization who has not enabled these. So there are ways to enable and disable certain parts of Copilot, which then, of course, limit what you can and can't do. But I have a full version, so you're going to see the full suite of where it lights up and all the capabilities that are part of it. And of course, some of these capabilities will be part of a tier. Some of these tiers are different, and we have a Pro Plus, we have a Enterprise, we have a Business. Most of the things you're going to see here are part of Business, but the Enterprise, there might be one. I think the only one I'm going to show you is Spark, which currently right now is underneath the GitHub Copilot Enterprise tier. And the reason why they did that is because it is still considered to be preview. Well, it's very preview. Well, we might not call it preview. I can't remember if they actually moved out of preview, but it's in a tier that is limited or is smaller. So they're limiting the amount of traffic to it based off of the need to get feedback and, of course, improve the service over time. So with that being said, I don't do slides hardly at all, and I figured since this is more of a informal kind of call, you guys certainly can ask questions at any time. I'm just going to go straight into sharing, and then if you have questions, please bring them up. But I'll make sure we monitor the time so that we get this done within the time allotted. So let me go ahead and share. While I'm sharing, who here has Copilot already? All right, I saw at least 4 of you. Hey, Derek, or maybe it's Alec. I'm hitting the share button, but I am not seeing any share content pop up in my view. Can you just double check if I have permissions to share?
I think so.
All right. Well, that's not fun. Derek, can you share at all? You obviously you can share probably. When you hit the share button, do you see?
see.
I can see stuff. Let me.
Okay. I'm all right. Okay. This is unfortunate. I might need to drop and come back in again just to see.
Yeah,
if I can
give it a try
something.
dropping out.
All right.
Maybe even kill teams and restart it just to see. So give yourself.
That's a good idea. I'll be right back. Sorry about that.
We can blame the outage going on right now for that.
It could be. I mean, it could be a potential with the DNS issues that we're seeing. But has anybody actually played with GitHub Spec Kit? It's like David or Daniel has. So I put a link into the chat window, kind of a getting started for GitHub Spec Kit. Brian, that's a lot of truth to that one. So
I've loaded it up a few times and meant to do it, but man, that link isn't even working for me. Oh, there it goes. Just took a minute.
yeah, I've done a couple different projects with it. One of them, it took me literally 3 days of the agent telling the agent, go ahead, as it went through each task and stuff. So it was pretty intense.
That worked. All right.
Awesome, man.
You can see my screen.
Yep, we can see.
Yep.
Oh, fantastic. I thought we were going to have ourselves a little bit of a ordeal here. All right. So first I'm going to do is we're going to start off in the github.com property here, and we'll talk about some of the places where when you have a GitHub Copilot license, certain things are available to you and light up. And then we will dive into the IDE, and from there we will talk about Spec-driven development. And then we'll also, of course, start to talk about some of the new things that are coming out and the idea of what it means to be developing and to use all these services together. So if you have GitHub Copilot, you might have seen it depending on your tier, but there is this thing called an agent panel. This panel here is a quick way at the top of the header of github.com to be able to then just give an idea, and you want to go ahead and fire off the coding agent to a specific repository on a specific branch. You may just type in a prompt and then kick it off, and you'll start to see the sessions load underneath here. There is a better view to view this, which is to do this through this overall chat with Copilot. This is a new area where we're going to start adding in things like the management of agents, etc. We have a handful of views right now. The chat one, of course, is just a place to be able to ask questions about github.com and all your repositories and items within those repositories. And then we have the agent. This is a blown out view of the agent screen that you just saw, which is called the agent panel. And then we have a couple other ones here, one called Spaces, one called Spark. And so for the Spaces one, I don't know if you're familiar with Spaces. This is something that comes with GitHub Copilot. If you're familiar with the old knowledge bases that were part of an older version, that you were exposed those through your GitHub chat or your chat screen, your Copilot chat within the IDE. They ended up saying let's make a 2.0 version of that, and so Spaces are a place to be able to essentially add in content, whether that be files that you want to upload or content that already lives within GitHub itself, and then ask questions against that. So you have personal Spaces and you can have organizational exposed ones. So for example, if you have a best practices, a style guide, a way to do things, maybe onboarding, and you have documents that explain those, of course, you can then add those into the space itself, whether that be something that already exists within GitHub or a file you upload. And then anyone who needs to ask questions about those can use the space LLM to be able to then, of course, get those answers. So as opposed to saying, here's the wiki or the information and go search it, this is just a way to basically create your own grounded chatbot against certain documents and content that allows you to share with your team. The other one is Spark. So if we go back to the agent part here, if you click on the Spark here, I went to Spark. There we go. I thought I had it all loaded, but I didn't. Now we get to see these cool stars fly around. Anytime, it's just not connecting. That's why. Let me go back to this while it's connecting. And if I click on Spark here, the UI will be the same thing. We can add a prompt, an idea, some sort of guidance on what you want to build. You could even add images to drive the way the look and feel is. And then you can kick it off, and what will happen is it'll create a site for you. And let's go take a look at that site. This site is driven off of a prescriptive kind of style and format. It's all going to be a React backend because that's the current technology stack that they're supporting. They might support others in the future. But the nice thing about the Spark is that you can change things like the themes. So you can change some of the different views. You can check out the data, and this has behind it, it's a key value pair database that allows you to actually persist and manage data. And of course, then you can dive into some of the AI prompts if you have AI capabilities added. So there is a small AI service that is part of Spark that you can use to then give those AI-based features in here. And then there's assets, which are different files that are supporting the generation of this site. This is really for prototyping. It's for power users or users who want to quickly create something to show an idea. And right now in this current version of it, you can continue to iterate on it and of course build it. But the moment you export the code, so if you look at it, we can see the code view as well. We can export this out to a repository. But there, at least when I last looked, there is no bidirectional. In other words, when I go back to that repository and make changes, it does not update this view, which would be nice, but I don't think that's right now in the future. It does allow you to publish. You can publish a site out and expose it to certain people to use, to view and play around with the prototype. If you keep it to only you, of course, then you alone will only see it. There is no way to unpublish, which I asked that question, but essentially, if you have enterprise, I think this is underneath the called enterprise. You do have actually Spark might be, I can't remember. I think it's under enterprises, the actual tier. If you have that, you can be able to use this and play around, and of course build out nice prototypes. It's pretty solid in the quality of the stuff that comes out of it. It is of course something that is not enterprise ready. So when you do export your repo and start to build on it, you'll probably have to really kind of work on the production ready capabilities of it as well. All right, any questions about the things that come on github.com? All right, let's talk about, we're going to talk about SpecKit. SpecKit is a GitHub incubation project that is exposed through this repository, and you can download it. It's a CLI, you install the CLI, and then you can use the CLI to then enable SpecKit within your project or your workspace. And SpecKit is basically a collection of prompts and script files that guide you down this planning and ideation process of how do you actually create a well-structured specification that you can hand off to either a developer, you can hand it off to your agent mode that lives within your IDE, or you can hand it off to a coding agent out in github.com if you make sure you export that specification to a current GitHub issue. And actually, there's a second way as well, but I'll show you what that looks like too. But essentially, if you're not familiar with building out specs and why specification-driven development has kind of taken off in the industry, it's because we found out that LLMs really like structure, and they don't like ambiguity. And if you are familiar with the old vibe coding days where you were just asking questions as you go, they can go in directions that you don't want, and you can get down a rabbit hole quickly. So instead, we found out that if you put a lot of structure and a lot of content and context around what you want to build and how you want to build it, and of course also drive things like the instructions and the guidance that is also can be added for your repository or at the user level, or even at the organization level, you can drive this down. Those instructions will also put guardrails around your coding agents to be able to then, of course, write code with high quality, following the different best practices and guidance that you've provided to your team. But all this is so if you go out and install Spec Kit, it's going to install a CLI called specify. And when you do the specify, you go to a repository and you say specify init. And if you're in an already existing project, you'll do these switch called dash here. It will add some folders and some files that are going to be used to drive Spec Kit within your project. And then you have what are called slash commands that are exposed through the Copilot chat to be able to then, of course, build these specifications and then, of course, implement those ideally. There are a handful of these different commands here. Let's get down here. So these are the main ones. So we just talked about GitHub Copilot instructions. I'm assuming you guys are familiar with instructions. I'll show you what mine look like. But SpecKit also is driven by what's called a constitution. So you can then drive a constitution to say, here's how I want you to build your specs and how I want you to then create the plans for those specifications and so on. Once you have a constitution done, and I usually build my constitution that is congruent with my Copilot instructions, so that way they're not contradicting, because both of them will be loaded as context into your chat session. Then what you use is called the specify command, or specify / command. This is where you're going to have given an idea. You're going to say speckit dot specify, and you say, I want to build this. And it can be a greenfield full project, or it can be a feature. I want to add on a new page that does this into my site. I need to add these fields. I want it to do this behavior, and I want it to look this way. And then what will happen is SpecKit will go out and review your entire code base. It'll, of course, take into consideration the constitution and your GitHub Copilot instructions. And it will build a specification.md file, and that specification will be what is used as the base of your idea. We then go through the process of reviewing that, and then once we review that specification, we have a command called clarify. So if there are any things that are ambiguous, or things that were not mentioned, or ideas that were not covered within your specification, this is where you can ask the questions. And it's really a question base. You can say, have we thought about security, on encryption at rest? And it will look at the specification. It will then, of course, start to create some ideas, and then it will then do a question and answer, kind of an ideation session, saying, we could do this. Would you like to do A, B, C, or D? And then, of course, if you don't like that, you continue to ask other questions, and it'll ask a new set of questions, and it comes to what's called a logical conclusion of that clarification. With that results, it goes back to the spec, updates the spec, and now the specification should have new information that's going to be able to cover your questions or remarks within that clarify command. After you do that, you typically come up here and run the plan. The plan is the actual technical implementation plan. So it will start to dive into not just the functional side, but the technical side, build out a technical plan. It will also provide a handful of extra files that are going to be around data types, as well as its research. So it's going to also provide some context around what it used as far as research and why it's doing what it's doing, as well as ideas of what some of those data types should look like based off of its plan itself. And then once you're all done with that, you can create tasks themselves, which is a great way to actually then kind of break it down into individual items for the LLM to work on. Otherwise, it'll just assume those tasks and make those from there. And then finally, we go to the implement. And once you do the implement, it will synchronously implement that directly in a branch that has already been created from the .specify. So when you do a .specify, it does create a new branch for you automatically. So all those different changes will be isolated from your default branch. And of course, the implementation can take X amount of time. As you guys are aware, when you implement through the IDE, you also have this concept of scope of what you can and can't do. So a lot of times you'll see allow commands that are asking you to approve of a command that the chat is trying to implement or trying to execute. You can do an auto approve, so it automatically does it without your intervention, but you're basically waiting to watch that plan execute or implement. If you want to, there's a way for you to take that specification and tell the chat to say, hey, I want you to go out and I want you to create a GitHub issue. And I want you to put this specification in that issue, which then allows us to then assign that issue to the GitHub Copilot coding agent, and then let the agent go off and asynchronously build out that feature for you. And then there's one last one, which is I'll show you. There's a new little feature that allows you to kick off the coding agent from directly within your IDE here. If you can see this button here, you can delegate this. So if you have the context in the current chat around the specification, you can also, of course, drag and drop those specifications as context into the window here and say, now I want you to kick this off. It will skip the idea of creating an issue and then assigning the coding agent. It'll just assign the coding agent, and all the context will be provided directly to the agent itself. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to show you quickly what it looks like in code here. So I mentioned about initializing the spec kit. Here is the breakdown of the folder structure. We have our memory, which is our constitution. Your constitution can be built by doing that constitution / command. I ask it always to check my GitHub Copilot instructions because I have built that out specifically for this project. This is a Next.js React-based application. It will create that for you. Of course, that'll be the guiding constitution for everything that happens in Spec Kit. There are supporting scripts as well as supporting templates for all the different outputs. And so I mentioned each one of those / commands will create a file, for one for the specification, one for the plan, and of course I mentioned about building out tasks. These can of course be updated. They are places that have placeholders within them, and these scripts will then of course copy these templates, and then the LLM will of course update those templates in the appropriate folder. So I'm not going to run it because I don't have time, but I'm going to show you just so you see with /spec kit. So these are the different / commands that are available, as I showed you from the README file. They are all living inside of your prompts folder. So essentially, these are all just custom prompts that are exposed as / commands. And this is what drives each one of these different / commands themselves. So when you do a /specify or speckit.specify, it will run using this guidance. Okay. And then what actually gets output once you do that? So let's go over to a branch that already has this done. And let's dive in here. So what happens is, so you'll notice that I jumped into a branch with kind of an obscure naming convention. Right now, the current version of this does an iterator, and then of course takes the first couple of words from the prompt that you put in to create an actual unique branch. They mentioned they were going to talk about changing that, but as I start to do my my / commands, the first thing it does is it creates a new branch. It creates a specs file and sticks in the actual branch name to identify all the different output from our spec kit commands to be underneath a certain branch that or folder that matches the branch. When it comes to the specification itself, you'll notice if you look at the template, this is based off the template. And if you look at it, so it's going to be based more like a requirements document where you're going to see breakdown of different features as user stories. And so we'll have user stories, and we'll have details about those user stories, and we even have things called acceptance scenarios and criteria. If you guys are familiar with things like Azure DevOps, and you know that most of those user stories, features, and epics above, those types of requirement-based work items, they all have a field for acceptance criteria and other different fields. This is just one big specification that contains them all specific to a single user story. So this is broken down to several different user stories to implement this particular feature. And if I jump up to the top, I think this was header notifications. The website that we have is, let me just do a npm run. we'll let this guy run. But essentially, I just asked it to say, hey, we have an application. It's basically a dashboard. It's a mocked out dashboard with some fun, fancy graphs and charts, and it has some unimplemented features up in the header. One of them being a bell. The bell is the notification bell, and we wanted to be able to implement the notification bell. And I did this through building out a spec, and then having, in this case, I had get a Copilot chat session run this synchronously, and then it's still sitting directly within my my local repository itself. So I have not pushed this branch up to GitHub and tried to merge it directly from within github.com. Anyone on the call here, are you guys using this kind of method for, not necessarily Spec Kit, but even if you have your own custom prompts to build out specs or some sort of structured content to build things? Are you guys, anyone doing that right now in your jobs? I'll take silence as a no.
I don't have any that I've reused a ton, but I find small, like when you're prompting just the agents in GitHub Copilot, small specifics or spec driven things tend to work better than like just whole big like, hey, write me a whole front end with not much input, and it just goes off the rails.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Jeremy, you have your hands up.
Yeah, I've been using spec-driven development for a few projects now, and I found that the more context I can provide, the less likely it's going to go off the rails.
Yep. And that is the goal. And I had, before Spec Kit, I had my own prompts as well, and I honestly stole them from a gentleman named Harper. And there were about 3 different sets of prompts. The first one was to ideate, which was ask me question one by one about this idea, and it basically took the power of the LM to say, hey, have you thought of this? And then you can ask questions back. How about this? And output a specification. And then the other prompts about really kind of defining it in a certain format. And the other one was, how do I actually build what's called a prompt plan? And the prompt plan in that case was just a handful of prompts that were going to be done in phases to be able to build out the project. I kind of liked one thing about that, which was that it allowed me to ask the question of, hey, I want every phase, I want to be able to validate and verify the things you're doing before you go off the rails. And if I notice something that's wrong, I want to fix it before we go on to phase 2 or phase 3. I have not seen that in Spec Kit, but I also haven't seen Spec Kit go off the rails too much for me in my demos. But again, of course, I do a lot of demo stuff as opposed to production-based coding these days. So I bet you there are ways for it to go off the rails on its own. So this is what the website looks like. This is the actual bell itself. It was not implemented on this branch yet, so I'm not going to test it. But essentially, this was about how do I actually get that to be enabled. One thing we could actually do now, since I don't have this enabled, and I know that this is something we could probably send off to the agent, is that if I wanted to, I could do this. And we're going to try it. Might as well try it. This spec right here is currently something that I want to send off to the coding agent. So what we do, the way I've done it before is I will drag over the spec into, actually, I'll probably just take the entire branch over there, or the folder, so I can read all the different files. And then I can say, I would like you to, plan. And then what I can do then is, of course, kick it off here by delegating it to the thing. We'll go ahead and do that. That way we can kind of see what it does. It's going to create a branch out there in the repository. And if we don't like it, we can always throw it away. But it's a big, great place to also show you how you can then view the work, review the work, and then ask Copilot to continue to iterate on that if there are issues or things that you want to change. So with that now running, we talked about the spec, we talked about the plan. The plan is going to be more about details, right? We're going to talk more about more of implementation strategies and folder structures and what we're going to build, etc. Close that off. So we can now, because I want to show you where that coding agent is and what's running. Let's go back to, we'll go into the issues. Let's go to pull request. So we had 3 here. If I refresh this, we should have a 4th coming up. There we go. 4th is in. And so the way, when you kick off one of these coding agent sessions, whether you do it from an issue, so I could come into an issue, and if I said, I want to implement this, this dependency vulnerability scanning, I can assign it directly to Copilot if I have Copilot coding agent enabled in my repository. The moment I kick that off, you'll see little eyes that show up on the bottom here, and then a session starts. And I'm going to show you that in the other work item or the other process here. So when you do that, it'll automatically start to kick off a work in progress. Actually, you know what? I want to show you this first. Let's go down here. So you'll notice we have a pull request. These are ones that I did run the coding agent on. And you'll notice that Copilot was assigned it. That's why it ran. And if you go down to the bottom, we have this Copilot eyes. So it's going to be, creating this session. And then it actually then, of course, will link to the individual pull request. And the first one you saw was the WIP, work in progress. When it's complete, it actually will update titles, bodies of the pull request with the work that was done. You can also dive into the session and view the actual work that was happening on the Copilot agent itself. This is our new kind of command center view of our sessions. So we have our individual sessions that are running. This is one that already ran. This is the one, of course, that we just kicked off. In the middle here is the implementation itself, basically the steps that were taken by the agent itself. And then over here on the right-hand side is the pull request details and any files that changed. So one of the things that is nice about the coding agent is that it does have a couple default MCP options. So it has the GitHub as well as the Playwright MCP servers. They are a little bit hamstrung. I just found this out myself, but I tried to tell the coding agent to create an issue or a set of issues, but it is watered down its list of different tools that are available through the MCP. You'll notice there are no create or update ones in here. Apparently GitHub has turned that off. But we do have, that is not where, there we go. So, but you can go down and really kind of take a look at all of the different things that are happening. The nice thing also, it does implement this Playwright MCP server. So if you're not familiar with Playwright, Playwright is an end-to-end functional testing framework, similar to Selenium, but it's implemented per language, per runtime. And the nice thing about this is that if you do have ask the Copilot coding agent to do some work, it will also build tests in Playwright, run those tests, and then verify that the changes that it made itself follow and have those tests pass and succeed. It also allows you to do screenshots. So it kicks up a browser session, and then of course it will automatically do some browser screenshots and add those into your pull request where you're doing UI-based work. And so it's really nice to be able to see some of the stuff that's happening. But of course, at the end, if you have any issues with your Copilot coding agent itself, you'll see that in any of the different logic that shows up here. Like when I tried to create that issue, I saw that it said you do not, due to your environment restrictions, you cannot create GitHub Copilot, GitHub issues. So if you do have issues or think that this ran amok, you can always go down and see all the different commands and all the different thinking that it's been doing to come out with the final. And of course, at the very end, it will summarize all that work for you. So let's go take a look at the existing one that's already running. And so let's dive into here. So this is the implementation plan that was created by Spec Kit. So as we were over here building the spec itself, I said, please go and automatically implement. This is what it requests itself as far as what it's driving, what it's going to be doing, the technical approach, compliance, etc. And then, of course, right now it's at the process right now where it's looking at putting in some constants because I asked it to use mock data. I think it's probably going to put some constant data in there that's going to be some example notifications that will show up inside of the actual tool itself. So with that being said, the one thing I want to show is I want to show about the coding agent, not the coding agent, the Copilot code review agent. We started off, we're building more agents. I assume you folks are also looking at GitHub Universe. I'm hoping you are. It started the beginning at the hour here for this call itself, but a lot of new stuff coming up and being announced around agents and what's coming out these days. So the 3 agents, and technically there's obviously when you think about the IDE and the ones that are running locally on your machine, but are the auto fix from the GitHub Advanced Security side of things. So if you run your code QL and you have some issues that are identified, you have an agent that can do an auto fix, which automatically fixes those for you. And then they implemented the code review agent as well as the coding agent itself. For the code review agent, that shows up over in if you were to jump into any one of these, actually, let's do this instead. Let me go back. I'm going to pretend like this has been, so we have this, and I think I should be able to, is it already there? Let me see if I have a pull request so I can create one. All right, so if I create a pull request, because I created this pull request and not the coding agent, so there is a distinction there. And when there's pull requests that I create as a user, and there's pull requests that are created and managed by the coding agent itself. I can then, of course, assign reviewers. So I can come in here and assign Copilot as a reviewer. And if I were to do that, what will happen is you'll see some eyes pop in to the pull request that'll see that the Copilot agent is reviewing it. Actually, that's something that they might have removed, but we'll wait till this pops up. It takes a little time for the agent to kind of start cooking. And when it does, it will then, of course, provide some discussion on what it was trying to review. It will then, of course, show the individual items that it suggests that are updates, whether they be security-based ones or just best practices. And then you can review those and then, of course, apply those directly from within the pull request, and even instruct it to not make these changes or to check again, right? So you can actually have it check and review your pull request multiple times. So let me refresh this and see if this is coming through. Still running. We'll let that sit for a second and we'll come back into our other one. And I might just jump into some other things while we're waiting for this.
Hey, Kevin, we have one question that's really great from Brian in the chat window about whether Spec, we are starting to look at Spec Kit, but trying to decide where it fits in the life cycle. Should a business analyst start the specification first? Where does that dev start using it? Is it a waterfall type of thing where everything is planned up front? Or can we try it for each sprint iteration based on each task assigned to a dev? So to me, Spec Kit is more aligned with iterative process, but I'd like to get your input on it.
Yeah, there are folks internally, and I know a gentleman specifically who thinks specs will replace work item tracking systems altogether. It'll be the source of truth, and you'll just have specs living inside of a folder, inside of a repo. Completely ignoring the idea of how do I prioritize the work that's within these specs, right? Because you saw there was multiple user stories to implement a spec, so you can kind of relate a spec to a feature in the world of Azure DevOps. And so we take a more practical approach at Microsoft as far as how we guide our customers around. If you're using work item management tracking system, let's say you're using GitHub Issues, or you're using Azure DevOps, or you're using Jira, right? You have some sort of method of managing and formatting your work. And you go through the process, more than likely in an Agile process, of doing weekly grooming, Of course, making sure that you have folks, technical folks, as well as business folks in those grooming meetings to be able to make sure you have successfully groomed your work item or your user story to a level that allows it to be handed off to a developer. The same concept here applies, but we can use AI in all of these different areas. So we can, in a grooming session, use SpecKit to say, I want to be able to add to an existing spec. So let's say you started off, someone said, here's a high level item. We haven't built out the description, but we just know that the stakeholders and the product owner said, I want to have this feature, and it's going to be probably a high priority feature. Well, you can go through the process in a grooming session of opening up SpecKit and using SpecKit to be able to build a specification based off of the input that the user is there. So you can do a /clarify to be able to say, hey, let's look at the details of this. Let's ask the business owners if this looks good. Are there things missing? Let's go continue to iterate and make these specifications more tight. And then, of course, you can, from there, you can do things like use some of our built-in MCP server support. So there's a Jira one, there is an Azure DevOps, and we have, of course, our GitHub MCP server, where I can take these specifications and say, please push this up to a GitHub issue. And so these are all things that you can do. Add this spec as an issue in GitHub. And of course, I will make sure I drag the spec over, and I will then kick this off, and we'll see what happens there. But that is the process that I currently see most people who are deciding to use LLMs to build out or to define work and to ideate across work, is that they're either doing it inside of an LLM like ChatGPT or Microsoft 365 Copilot or Claude, and then they of course cut and paste those specs or tell it to put it in a downloadable format, and they use that to download from there. But the point is that eventually it has to get into your work item management system so that you can track it, because if you're going to continue to track velocity, you're going to continue to want to be able to tie test cases to those different work items to be able to track what's being tested, not all it has to be inside your work item system. There's others that like to be able to then do it all in their work item system, stay using their grooming sessions and building out everything within the actual work item system, tooling system, and then they go out to GitHub or into the IDE and say, I want you to pull work item 234, and I want to be able to use that and to create a spec in SpecKit to then drive and assign to a coding agent. So you can do it any which way you wish that feels best. It's not seamless, and you'll notice that we have, in the announcements of GitHub Universe, we have a handful of announcements around planning, and then of course how that planning, of course, needs to get fit into your existing work item management processes. But it's still something where you have to go between the work item management system and the IDE, where you're actually going to be building things, and there are just current ways are just using MCP as integration points between them at all. And the answer, Brian, yes, you can do the same thing. So let's go back down here to see what's doing. So it's going out and creating this guy. So there is I should be able to go out to GitHub if it did create it successfully. Let's go back to here, and we'll refresh this, and we'll see if it actually created or not. I might go back to my thing and see. I don't see it in here, so there might have something here that we didn't do. Going to this, copying. Oh yeah, so this actually did it differently. Sometimes you have to tell it to use its tools. Unfortunately, GitHub creation tool is disabled. Maybe I didn't have that enabled. Yeah, it's right here. Create branches, pull request, issues. Maybe you don't have it in here. Okay. I don't see it in here. You're right. Anyways, there are ways for you to define the tools, and I've done it many times. It should have worked. Essentially, that same concept is for Azure DevOps. If you do the same thing and you do just say, please add this as a feature with epics and tasks within my Azure DevOps, it will go through the process of using that MCP server to connect and make those changes. All right. Sorry it didn't work, but that's just because I don't have my environment set up correctly. Let's go back over here and take a look and see where we're at with our pull requests. Let's do this through the view of the agent here. So let's dive into oh, this is a good one to show while we're waiting for that one to be done. So I had kicked this off separately. I tried a little experiment, which didn't work exactly, but I thought of the idea, like, it wouldn't it be nice if we could tell the coding agent to build a spec using the spec kit artifacts that are part of the repository. As I showed you, we had the prompts, we had the templates and the scripts necessary to be able to create the specs and create the plans. And then, of course, I asked it to then create a GitHub issue. And then, of course, I was going to use that to then track the work, and then, of course, use that also to do an implementation. It didn't quite work that way because of some of the things I found. I don't know if I can find it quickly in here, but let me see if I can do a quick search for issues. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, since I can't directly create issues, so this is where I found out that we had issues because the issue tool was not part of the MCP enabled tools within the GitHub coding agent, that it wouldn't work. But it ended up going through the process of doing an implementation as well, and I didn't want that. I wanted to see if we could get the coding agent to just build the specification and stick it in. So it did do that. So it did create a specification. You can see right here, it sits here in the spec. It did a few things that I should have expected, which is because it ran the scripts itself, it also created a separate branch and did things I didn't want to do since I'm already working on a branch created by this coding agent. But it was a good experiment. But the nice thing about this is that you get to see some of the output. Because it decided to go through an implementation, even though I didn't ask it, it did do, because this was a UI, it was able to create screenshots using that Playwright MCP server integration I mentioned. So you can see that when I asked it to implement the profile, you can see over here where it has the little avatar, which is just in this case John Doe. And then when you click on it, you get a drop-down profile, which then routes you to a profile page. And then this is what it looks like in mobile view, etc. So it's really nice that it made all these decisions for me as far as to verify that it's working correctly and to also save that into the pull request for context of review from there. One thing to note here is that there are some configuration you can do with your coding agent. By default, if you have your firewall enabled, it will automatically block certain calls out to the internet, and you do have the ability to have to edit what's called an allow list. So I can then add in these different URLs as things that can pass through the firewall, so that I can go out to shadcn for any of my components, and then of course fonts that are going to be pulled down directly from Google itself. All right, so that's nice. If you wanted to get to these different settings, we'll jump over to that one. Let's go into here. We'll dive into my repository for modern dashboard. If you go to settings, down here where we have, actually, it's not in this one. It's in, my apologies, it's in the overall organization Copilot settings. Here, you can, of course, see the different features that have been enabled for the organization, as well as the enable other ones that are specific to the repo. But down here we have this coding agent, and inside the coding agent we can define which repositories we want this to be enabled on. Of course, you can choose the ones you want or enable for all. One thing to note here, when it comes to using Copilot coding agent, it does use a premium request for each one of the different sessions. And depending on which tier you have X amount of included premium requests, and then once you go over that, it will start to charge you per premium request, which is cents, on the dollar. But even so, if you're using it a lot, of course, that's something that will add up. But again, you can define where you want to be able to have this enabled and light up. And then if we go back over to the modern dashboard, I wanted to get into maybe maybe I don't remember exactly where I put that. I was just playing with this. There it is. Inside of the actual repository itself, this is where we can enable the firewall and control our allow list. And as you can see, when I saw that I was blocking those, I've added these 2 different URLs into my firewall rules so that I can make sure that my test and my my coding agent is having all the resources necessary to build, test, and run and verify the code. And with that, I'm hoping that this thing is finally done. Yeah, we're not done yet. Oh, yes, we are. Good, good. Okay, let's take a look. Let's go to the pull request directly and see what happens. So we said implement the header with the badge, drop down persistence. Of course, it's going to come in here and talk about the implementation. It also showed the integration with Playwright. So you can see up here, the bell now has a little badge on top with the notifications. It shows if you click that, what those stubbed out notifications look like. And then, of course, we will then be able to, of course, dive into the session and see more about what will happen. And if I wanted to go and see if this works, of course, if you're all familiar with this, you can just pull down the branch that's associated with the pull request. So kill this. Let's check out this. And then we'll npm run it, and we'll see if we can see our features. This is a great way if you're reviewing the pull request and you want to see the work in action and you haven't put in a deployment out to some integration environment, you can then, of course, pull the code down from the pull request from the branch that's backing it, and then test it yourself. I do also see customers using the coding agent to start things, and then they finish it up inside of the agent mode in the Copilot chat. So it's going to be up to how your team works best. And of course, what works for each of you individually. But most teams will find that balance of what it's going to be best for them. And then, of course, they can evolve and grow on from there. One thing to note, I didn't show it here. I wonder if I have the screenshot. Let me see if I can pull it up real fast. It's a nice experiment. If you guys are familiar or follow one of our distinguished or engineers, his name is David Fowler. He had posted, he is currently the one managing the new .NET Aspire project. And they went through the process of implementing the coding agent and the code review agent and been using it for the last few weeks, and this is what they see. So you can see right here, this is the coding agent, and this right here is the code review agent, and there's David himself. But you'll notice that, of course, they are starting to really rely on a lot of code being written by these agents, freeing them up to do some of the other more difficult or more challenging work or more impactful work, while offloading a lot of more grunt work to those coding agents. But you can see the trend for this particular repository and the trend in the industry is that we're going to see that these agents are going to be the ones that are mostly contributing this code, and then we're going to be shifting towards that verify, validate, test, and review cycle, which may be discouraging to some developers that they're going to be doing less coding and more reviewing of agent codes, but it is the way we're moving. And anyways, that's just a nice little thing to see how it's working within Microsoft as well. And here's the sit. It's working just fine. Very good. With that, we're at top of hour. Were there any other questions that I didn't see in here, Derek, that I need to address?
I don't think so. Brian and I were just chatting a little bit about using GitHub Copilot with ADO, be able to use work items, and I gave him a link for creating an MCP server, but he was hoping to use it for ammo to move his organization to GitHub. but they like ADO boards. So, gave them a link on being able to use ADO boards with GitHub repos and take advantage of best of both worlds at that point. So
Yeah.
I think we might have got that answered.
Okay. Yeah. I think when you do it, you have to provide an org. This is my org, and my project name, is I think it was MCP testing is one of my ones I used. And if you do this, of course, you'll have to authenticate. It used to be where you would authenticate using the Azure CLI. I think that they've moved it out of the Azure CLI, and you should see a browser-based authentication experience. But we might as well try it in these last 2 minutes of this call and see what this thing decides to do for us. While that's doing that, I can do this. I can go to dev.azure.com. I do have existing work item hierarchies that I created from a different demo that we can at least see some of the output. So if I go into MCP testing, jump into my boards, go to my backlog. Yeah, these are things. So I had created a couple of these. So when I had created a settings tab for that modern dashboard, I did that through SpecKit, and SpecKit was able to say, here is the overall arching feature. We had 3 different user stories, and here are the tasks that we can do to implement those. Let's go see what this is doing. It might take too long to get this right, but the answer is if you do install this Azure DevOps MCP server, you should be able to interact directly with Azure DevOps. John, what's your question?
Yeah, if your team believes in TDD, can we add that into the Constitution as something that we like to do and have it actually write tests before it starts writing code?
That's a great question. The answer is yes. So I've seen customers in the Copilot instructions put a section in for TDD. And then that, of course, is going to drive all the ways that you do TDD. So you could put in here that makes sure that before you implement, you always have a empty test that passes, and then go ahead and build it out. And then when it breaks, and then of course fix until it passes. So you can drive how those tests are created at the beginning, and then manage throughout the implementation cycle.
I actually did that with one of my projects, and it would actually show me that it's generating the test. It would show me the test failing as it's going along. Once it wrote the code, it would go back and run the test. I've had some where the test didn't pass. It went back and reiterated the code, and then got the test to pass and stuff. So it shows you as it goes along, it does it. So it's pretty amazing.
Okay.
Quick, I see Brian put one thing in here. He's hoping that it wouldn't work so that he had more ammo for going to GitHub. Just know that the GitHub coding agent that only exists in GitHub. So there is a feature. I don't think I have it enabled. I'm just going to double check it. But if I were to open up this guy, I don't know if I have it. But there's a feature that allows you to then kick off. Yeah, there it is. So I can assign this to the Copilot agent. So I can say the same way I assign a GitHub issue to the coding agent, I can assign a work item directly to the coding agent. But my code must live in GitHub. So that's the difference. So we have a lot of customers who work in hybrid mode. They said, I'm not ready to move off of Azure DevOps. I think the boards are better. This is how we work. But they have done a migration from Azure repos over to GitHub repos. And then, of course, they get all those features that get enabled over in github.com. But they also have the integration here to be able to link, of course, with the GitHub connector over here, as well as assign work directly from within their work item. So just get your team to move over to GitHub repos at the minimum, and you'll get a lot of this goodness as well.
Any other questions? Jeremy, was that your question you just answered? Do you still have another question?
I do have another question.
Okay.
I'm just curious what you think about on the other end of the development, utilizing the spec-driven development to help assist in writing documentation.
That's a great one. So the answer is yes. We have a session. Derek is leading a enablement session for both my development side as well as the Azure side within our group. And in my development sessions for our customers, we are going to have a session all about how to use GitHub Copilot to manage documentation. So yes, the answer is we also can work backwards. If you're building out things and you want to make sure that your all your documentation, your READMEs, any of the different wikis that you might have connected, any of the specifications that might have been static, and you want to have, you've made some changes and you want to make sure your spec is representing the current implementation, you can go backwards and have it go through that review and update those to be accurate.
Yeah, so I put in the chat window that this isn't just for greenfield applications. Spec Kit can be used for brownfield integrated in.
All right.
Start doing development.
Thanks again for having me.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Alex, for setting this up and getting it recorded.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin, for joining us today. So, been great.
Yep. I'll go ahead and hit stop